The Political Revolution, Democracy and Civic Responsibility in Africa and Kenya. This is the struggle of self-governance. The desire for self-governance is one of the most powerful forces in human history. Across continents and centuries, people have fought against systems that denied them the right to determine their own political future. These struggles have taken many forms: revolution against colonial domination, movements against authoritarian regimes, and campaigns for democratic reforms. Political revolutions are rarely sudden events. They are usually the result of long periods of dissatisfaction, intellectual debate, and social mobilizations. Over time, citizens begin to question the legitimacy of existing political systems. They demand accountability, transparency, and representation in decision-making processes. When these demands grow strong enough, they produce transformative political change. The story which I wish to revolve around is the story of Rip Van Winkle, who reminds us that such transformations can occur while individuals remain unaware of their significance. Rip slept through the revolution that replaced the monarch with a republic. When he woke up, the people around him were discussing elections, rights, and political participation, concepts that had become central to the new political order. His confusion symbolizes what happens when citizens fail to engage with the political evolution and their societies. For Africa and many other regions of the world, the struggle for political freedom and democratic governance has been one of the defining narratives of modern history. Colonialism and the birth of African nationalism. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the African continent was dominated by colonial powers. European empires established administrative systems that prioritized the extraction of natural resources and the consolidation of political control rather than the welfare of African populations. Colonial governance often excluded Africans from meaningful participation in political decision-making. Indigenous institutions were weakened or replaced, and economic structures were designed to benefit external interests. However, colonial domination also created conditions that eventually gave rise to nationalist movements. African intellectuals, workers, and students began to question the legitimacy of colonial rule. They demanded the right for self-determination and establishment of independent states. The struggle for independence involved decades of political mobilization, diplomatic negotiations, and, in some cases, armed resistance. Across the continent, leaders emerged who articulated visions of national identity and political freedom. The mid-20th century witnessed a wave of independence movements that reshaped the political map of Africa. And the promise of and challenges of independence. When African nations achieved independence, many citizens hoped the political freedom would quickly lead to economic prosperity, social justice, and national unity. The early years of independence were marked by optimism. New governments embarked on ambitious programs aimed at expanding education, building infrastructure, and promoting economic development. However, the transition from colonial rule to independent governance also presented significant challenges. Many newly independent states inherited administrative systems that were designed primarily for control rather than democratic participation. Political institutions were often fragile, and economic structures remained dependent on the export of raw materials. In some centuries, or rather countries, political competition led to instability, military coups, and authoritarian rule. The promise of independence was therefore accompanied by the difficult task of building sustainable democratic institutions. This challenge remains relevant today. Democracy is as a continuous process. Democracy is not a single event that occurs when a country adopts the constitution or holds elections, but rather it is a continuous process that requires constant engagement from the citizens. A functioning democracy depends on several key elements. Among them, one, we have free and fair elections, independent institutions, respect for human rights, transparency in governance, and active civic participation. Without these key elements, democratic systems can become hollow structures that exist in form but not in substance. Elections alone do not guarantee democratic governance. If citizens vote based solely on ethnic loyalty or personal patronage rather than policy ideas and leadership competency, elections may reinforce the divisions rather than strengthen national unity. Therefore, democracy requires an informed electorate capable of evaluating leaders and policies critically. Kenya's journey towards constitutional democracy. Kenya's political history illustrates many of the challenges and achievements associated with democratic development in Africa. Since gaining independence in 1963, the country has experienced periods of political consolidation, reform movements, and constitutional transformation. One of the most significant milestones in Kenya's democratic evolution occurred in the adoption of the 2010 Constitution, which introduced major reforms designed to strengthen governance and expand citizen participation. The key features in the Constitution include 1. A comprehensive Bill of Rights, 2. The establishment of independent commissions, 3. Judicial reforms, 4. Devolved governments through county governments. Devolution in particular was intended to bring government closer to the people by transferring certain powers and resources from the national government to local counties. This system was designed to improve service delivery and promote equitable development across different regions of the country. But the question remains, are these things realistic? Do we have services brought close to the common citizen? Or it is just a story? The system that was designed to improve service delivery and promote equitable developments across different regions of that country. But however, the effectiveness of these reforms depends heavily on citizen awareness and participation. A constitution can provide a framework for democracy, but it cannot enforce itself. Citizens must remain vigilant in defending constitutional principles. The power and responsibility of the vote is another very key area which I wish to address. Voting is one of the most fundamental rights in a democratic society. Through elections, citizens have the opportunity to choose leaders who represent their interests and values. However, the power of the vote depends on how it is exercised. When voters make decisions based on careful evaluation of candidates, policies, integrity, and leadership capabilities, elections become a powerful tool for accountability. But when voting patterns are driven primarily by ethnic identity, political manipulations, or short-term material incentives, the democratic process becomes distorted. Leaders who rely on divisive tactics rather than policy ideas may gain power, but they often struggle to govern effectively. Civic education therefore plays a critical role in strengthening democratic systems. Citizens must understand that their vote represents not only personal choice but also a responsibility to the broader community. The dangers of tribal politics. One of the most persistent challenges facing democratic systems in many societies is the politicization of ethnic or tribal identities. Ethnic diversity can enrich societies by contributing cultural variety and historical perspectives. However, when political competition becomes organized primarily around ethnic identities, it can undermine the national cohesion. Leaders may exploit identities to mobilize support while avoiding substantive policy debates. Citizens may feel pressured to support candidates from their own ethnic communities, regardless of those candidates' competency or integrity. This dynamic creates a political environment in which accountability becomes secondary to identity-based loyalty. And therefore, over time, such systems can deepen social divisions and hinder national development. Overcoming tribal politics requires a collective commitment to the national identity and shared values. Citizens must prioritize leadership qualities and policy ideas over ethnic affiliations. I repeat this, citizens must prioritize leadership qualities and policy ideas over ethnic affiliations. Protecting democratic institutions. Where strong democratic institutions serve as safeguards against abuse of power. Independent courts ensure that laws are applied fairly. Legislative bodies provide oversight of government actions. Electoral commissions help guarantee the integrity of elections. Anti-corruption agencies investigate misuse of public resources. However, institutions are only as strong as the support they receive from their citizens. When citizens remain silent in the face of institutional abuse, those institutions can become weakened or compromised. Protecting democratic institutions therefore requires the public vigilance. Citizens must support transparency, demand accountability, and defend the rule of law. Civil society and grassroots movements. A civil society organization play an essential role in strengthening democracy. These organizations include community groups, advocacy organizations, and professional associations and non-governmental organizations. Civil society therefore provides platforms through which citizens can organize collective actions, raise awareness about social issues, and advocate for policy reforms. Grassroots movements have historically played a critical role in advancing democratic reform across the world. They mobilize citizens around shared concerns and hold government accountable to the people they serve. Supporting civil society therefore contributes to a vibrant and participatory democratic culture. The responsibility of the present generation is to observe that democracy is never guaranteed. Every generation must actively defend and strengthen the institutions that protect freedom and justice. The story of Rip Van Winkle reminds us of the dangers of disengagement. When citizens withdraw from civic life, political systems evolve without their input. The future of democratic governance in Africa and Kenya therefore depends on citizens who remain awake to the responsibilities of citizenship. They must vote wisely. They must hold leaders accountable. They must reject divisive politics. They must defend constitutional principles. Only through such engagement, such societies will ensure their political revolution lead to a lasting progress rather than the temporary change.